Imagine a man whose strength was so great that he could shatter a lion with his own hands. A warrior capable of defeating 1,000 enemies alone, and who, at the height of his fall, found redemption by overthrowing an entire temple. This is not a story of fiction, but one of the most impactful narratives of the Bible, Samson's life. But beware, Samson's story is not just about muscles and epic battles. It is a powerful lesson on pride, choices, and above all, the power of redemption. He had a great destination, received a supernatural force as a divine gift, but also faced temptations, betrayals, and finally a sacrifice that echoes to this day as a symbol of faith and obedience. What if I tell you that Samson's journey has a lot to teach about our own life? About how many times, even with talent and opportunities, can we fall because of our own choices? What's more, have you ever wondered what really happened between him and Delilah? Was Samson just a victim, or did it also have his share of guilt? Get ready to know every detail of this fascinating biblical story, from the sacred vote that granted his strength to the betrayal that led him to ruin, to his final act of redemption and victory. Stay with me until the end, because what happened to Samson can change the way you see your own journey. From the beginning, the story of Samson was already written in the stars. Their parents, a couple from the tribe, were unable to have children until an angel of the Lord appeared bringing a surprising message. They would have a son destined to free Israel from the Philistines. But there was a condition: Samson should be a Nazi, someone separate to God. This meant following a sacred vow, which included never drinking wine, not touching anything unclean, and, most importantly, never cutting the hair. This vote was the key to the power of God to operate in your life. Imagine the responsibility that fell on the shoulders of Samson's parents. Raising a child knowing that he had a prophetic destination was not a simple task. They could not allow him to break the rules of this divine commitment. After all, Samson's power did not come from him, but from his obedience to God. Each hair that grew was a symbol of the covenant between him and the Creator. But could a young man with such strength and potential be able to maintain this discipline? From an early age, Samson already proved to be different. Its strength was evident, but its temperament as well. He was not only physically powerful, but also determined and sometimes stubborn. The supernatural force God gave him was an amazing gift, but was also accompanied by challenges. Such a great gift needs to be accompanied by responsibility, and this is a lesson that Samson would take time to learn. And so the trajectory of the strongest man in the Bible began, a young man who was born with a greater purpose than he could imagine himself. But like every great call, the temptations, the mistakes, and the challenges also came. What happens when someone so powerful does not control their own impulses? This answer would come over time, and the price would be high. Early on, Samson showed that his supernatural strength was not a mere detail. It was something that challenged human logic. While other young people learned to handle weapons, he didn't need them. With his own hands, he was able to defeat any opponent. But along with this gift came a trait that would define his life: impulsiveness. He was not the type who thought twice before acting. If something bothered him, he solved it on time and not always the best way. Being strong physically does not mean being strong emotionally. And that was Samson's great internal struggle. He knew he had a sacred vow to fulfill, but often let his emotions speak louder than his mission. Have you ever imagined having immense power and at the same time being unable to control it? This caused him to enter various confusion, especially when he was carried away by pride and anger. On several occasions, Samson faced the Philistines, the enemies of Israel, without fear. But their battles were not always strategic. They were often impulsive, driven by the desire for revenge or the desire to show their strength. He did not understand that his true victory would come not only by the strength of muscles, but for obedience to the divine purpose. Pride was beginning to appear as a silent threat on his journey. Nevertheless, it was undeniable that Samson was an unmatched man. His name was already spread throughout the region, and even the Philistines feared crossing their way. But as with many who have large gifts, their greatest battle was not against external enemies, but against himself. And this battle was far from over. In one of his trips, Samson had a meeting that would test his supernatural strength like never before. Walking alone, suddenly a fierce lion emerged from the middle of the shrubs and advanced on him. Anyone else would panic, escape, or try to get a gun. But Samson? He simply wondered the beast and, without hesitation, held her with his own hands. In an impressive fight, he tore the lion in half like a piece of cloth. No sword, no throw, only the power that God has given you. This feat was not just an act of bravery, but a confirmation that Samson really had a divine power. God was enabling him to be a liberator of Israel, showing that when guided by faith, nothing could stop him. But did Samson take this event as a sign of his own greatness? Or did you realize that your strength came from God and not himself? This was the great dilemma of his life, understanding that his gift was not for his personal glory, but to fulfill a greater purpose. The most curious thing is that Samson told anyone about this episode. Maybe he was so impressed with what happened that he could not explain. Or perhaps, deep down, he started believing that strength was natural in him, not a gift from God. This silence could indicate the beginning of a problem that would only increase the disconnection between its gift and its true mission. Days later, as he passed the same place, Samson found the lion's corpse and realized that bees had made honey inside him. He caught a little and ate without thinking about the consequences. The problem? Like Nazi, he should not touch anything dead, for it broke his sacred vote. But Samson, once again, acted on impulse. Small slips like this show how strength without discipline can become a risk. And in his case, it was just the beginning of hasty decisions that would cost dearly in the future. Samson was not just a strong man, he was the biggest threat the Philistines had ever faced. The enemies of Israel dominated the region, oppressing the Hebrew people and imposing their mastery with iron hand. But then, a warrior comes with a supernatural force, which alone could face dozens, even hundreds of soldiers. The Philistines began to realize that while Samson was around, their power over Israel would never be absolute. But Samson was not a conventional leader. He did not organize armies, did not trace military strategies. He acted alone, moved by his anger and desire for revenge. In a striking episode, the Philistines plotted to capture him and sent soldiers to arrest him in the city of Gaza. Samson, however, not only escaped, but ran the city gates, which were immense and reinforced, and carried them hill above. A feat that served as a warning no one could stop it. The Philistines were increasingly desperate to eliminate him. Each time they tried to attack him, Samson defeated them easily. In one of the most impressive clashes, he killed 1,000 Philistine soldiers with nothing but a donkey jaw. What was supposed to be an ambush became a massacre. He was fulfilling his role as Israel's judge. But was it doing it the right way? His strength was used to fight enemies, but also to satisfy his own fury. The war between Samson and the Philistines was far from over. But now, instead of facing it on the battlefield, the Philistines have decided to change their strategy. They realized that to defeat such a strong man, it was not enough to attack him physically. It was necessary to reach it at its most vulnerable point, your heart. And that's how Delilah came into the scene. Samson had already shown that his strength was unparalleled, but the Philistines realized something even more dangerous. He had a weakness. And this weakness was not a weapon or ambush, it was your own heart. Samson had a history of falling in love with Philistine women, ignoring the warnings of the people of Israel. It was then that Delilah, a cunning woman, chosen by the Philistines to seduce him and discover the secret of her strength. Delilah wasted no time. With her beauty and persuasion, she won Samson quickly. He was so involved that he did not realize that this woman was not reliable. As he thought he was experiencing a novel, Delilah had a clear goal to tear the truth about his strength. At first, Samson played with the situation, giving false answers. He said that if he were tied with new strings or leather straps, he would lose his strength. But each time Delilah tested these lies, he easily broke free. However, Delilah was persistent. She began to press him emotionally, saying that if he really loved her, he would not hide anything from her. Samson, despite being a physically strong man, was emotionally vulnerable. He gave in. He said that his strength came from a sacred vow made to God and could never cut his hair. It was all the Philistines needed. Delilah waited until he fell asleep and, without mercy, had the long hair that symbolized his covenant with God. By the time his hair touched the ground, Samson became an ordinary man. When the Philistines invaded the room, he tried to react as before, but realized in despair that his supernatural strength was disappeared. He was captured without difficulty. Delilah's betrayal not only led him to prison, but symbolized something even worse: he broke his connection with God. And now, without his strength and without his vision, since the Philistines cruelly ripped his eyes, Samson was facing his worst moment. Samson, the most feared man by the Philistines, was now completely defenseless. His supernatural strength disappeared along with his hair, and his confidence became despair. As he opened his eyes, or rather, trying, he realized he was in complete darkness. The Philistines, in an act of cruelty, ripped their eyes, leaving him blind and humiliated. The great warrior, who once overthrew armies alone, was now dragged as a defeated prisoner. He was taken to Gaza, the same city where he once demonstrated his power by carrying the gates on his shoulders. Now, however, it was being exposed as a Philistia victory trophy. They put it to rotate a mill, a work done by animals, as a mockery. The pride that made him believe it was invincible was destroyed. Samson, who has always trusted his own strength, had to face his new reality: he was nothing without God. The Philistines celebrated their capture as if it were the greatest triumph in history. They believed that their god, Dagon, had defeated the God of Israel. Little did they know that this story had not yet come to an end. As Samson turned the mill, day after day, something happened without anyone noticing. Her hair started to grow again. And with him, his faith was reborn. Samson finally understood that his strength never came from muscles or hair, but from his obedience to the sacred vote. He had lost everything: his vision, his freedom, and his position as judge of Israel. But something inside him still throbbed. He knew that God had not finished his story. His time of arrogance and impulsiveness had passed. Now, in his weakness, he was beginning to see something he never saw when he had visioned the true purpose of his life. But was there still a chance of redemption? In the darkness of his new reality, Samson found something he never sought before: humility. For years, he trusted only his strength in his own instinct, without realizing that all he had from God. Now, with nothing but his faith, he began to pray. His broken heart cried out for the Lord, not for revenge, but for a last chance to fulfill his divine purpose. Meanwhile, the Philistines continued to celebrate their defeat. For them, that blind and humiliated Samson was no longer a threat. What they didn't know was that while they mocked, something invisible was happening. The real Samson was resurfaced. Not the arrogant and impulsive warrior, but a man who finally understood the importance of his covenant with God. The day of the biggest celebration of the Philistines has arrived. In the temple of Dagon, thousands of people gathered to celebrate the victory over the enemy they feared the most. To make humiliation complete, they brought Samson to be ridiculed publicly. But instead of despairing, he saw that opportunity as a last act of faith. He asked to be taken to the central columns of the temple, relying on them as if he was just trying to balance himself. It was at this moment that he prayed like never before: "Lord, remember me. Give me strength once again, that I can defeat these Philistines and fulfill my call." Unlike the other times, this prayer did not come from vanity, nor the desire to prove your strength. It was a request for redemption, a sincere cry for God to be glorified. And then, something started to change. The temple was crowded. Thousands of Philistines, including people's leaders, were gathered to mock Samson and celebrate their victory over Israel. Without them knowing, that moment would be the stage of one of the most powerful acts ever recorded in biblical history. Samson, with firm hands on the central columns of the temple, felt God's power one last time flowing through his body. His supernatural strength had returned. The Philistines laughed, without realizing that they were facing their greatest mistake: underestimate the power of the God of Israel. Samson then made his last prayer, "Lord, strengthen me more this time." And with a final effort, he pressed the columns with all their strength. For a moment, the whole temple trembled. The laughter of the Philistines was interrupted by the deafening sound of the cracking stones. Before they could react, the structures collapsed, crushing everyone inside. In this last act, Samson defeated more enemies in his death than in his entire life. The man who had fallen because of pride and disobedience found his redemption by delivering his life to his people. His final sacrifice not only brought a decisive victory against the Philistines, but also demonstrated that even in times of greater weakness, God can still use those who repent and turn to Him. Thus ended the journey of Samson, a man-marked man, but also by an undeniable divine call. Your story teaches us that no matter how many mistakes we make, there is always a chance of redemption when we seek God with a sincere heart. Samson was Israel's strongest judge, but his greatest victory was not against the Philistines, he was against himself, finally understanding the purpose for which he was created. Samson's story shows us that having gifts and talents is not enough if we do not know how to use them wisely. He received a supernatural force, but his greatest fight was not against the Philistines, it was against his own choices. His fall came when he trusted himself more than in God, and his redemption happened when he finally recognized where his true power came from. How many times in our lives are we like Samson? We have opportunities, skills, dreams, but we are carried away by pride, temptations, or impulsive decisions. Samson's fate could have been different if he had chosen obedience from the beginning. But even after his fall, God did not abandon him. This means that no matter how wrong we have, there is always a chance to start over. Now think about your own life. Have you been using your talents the right way? Are you following the way God has prepared for you, or are you missing opportunities? Samson only realized his true purpose when it was too late. You still have time to change your story. If this story inspired you, be sure to enjoy this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell of notifications to track more content like this. And there is another amazing video appearing on the screen. Now click and keep plunging into Bible stories.